Hey guys, in this video I'm going to talk about white balance, or where to set it. So I'm Daniel Norton, photographer here in New York. I make videos like this about technique, about philosophy. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, go ahead and subscribe. Sorry again for kind of a late video. It's been crazy this last week or so, I'm happy to be busy. So anyways, the latest, I get this question a lot in different forms. So the latest version of it was, that I think they were looking at Capture One, and they were saying, well, the white balance is not this, it's this, or I often get, where do you set your white balance? I get, so there's lots of questions about white balance. So I'll start off by saying that part of it comes down to whether or not you want something to look, or need something to look correct versus looking good, right? And good meaning good to your eye, like good to your vision, good to what you want to do, not like correct can't be good. And what I mean by that is, if you're trying to, let's say you're shooting fashion, right? Or you're shooting a product and it needs to be exactly the right color. That's a much different situation than, let's say, you're shooting a portrait. Back in the days of film, back in the day, we would almost always put like a little bit of a warming filter, especially if somebody had like paler skin like me, on the lens. And that would, give you a little bit of warmth, which kind of brought the skin up. It had a pleasant look to it, right? One of the reasons why, let's say, for instance, fluorescent light was always regarded as being very bad is because it was tended to have spikes in the green, or rather it was missing red, or it didn't have the ability to bring out red. So you take some person like me that's got a lot of red in their skin. If the light doesn't help bring that red out, I look super pale because there's no red, right? So I look basically... So, anyways, warming filters. So warming filters are different, by the way, than white balance. Warming filters, things like 81Bs and stuff, they're like a warm color, but they're not like color correction. That's a whole different thing. We're going to talk about color correction today because it's a little bit different. But I just thought I'd do a little side note there. So basically, you've got a few things. To answer the general question, if I am shooting with flash, for instance, and I use a Photo Flash, which is very, very consistent, I set my white balance generally on flash. It is, I think Capture One calls it, it really depends on the camera. People are saying Capture One calls it, but your camera itself has a certain white balance for flash that it considers to be correct, and every camera is slightly different, actually, when you start to actually look at the numbers. Some people like to set it at 6,000 or sometimes 5,600, although flash tends to be cooler than daylight by a little bit, so setting it at 5,600, some people set it as low as 5,000, right? Because back in the day, film was generally 5,000 is what we considered to be the correct color temperature was for daylight. But so that kind of varies on what you want your image to look like, and also the camera that you have, and any filtration or whatever that you plan on doing in post, or maybe you're putting a filter on the lens as you're shooting. So that does vary, and it comes down to kind of taste. For me, I generally leave my white balance either on daylight, always, or on flash, or I put it on, right now I'm using a Nikon, so it's called incandescent, but I put it on tungsten settings. So if I'm going to do that in Kelvin settings, I would set it to 5,600 usually for daylight, about 6,000 or so for flash, but I might leave it at 5,600, it really depends. What that's going to do, by the way, is if I leave it at 5,600, but I shoot with flash, it's going to make it a little bit warmer, which is kind of what I was talking about at the beginning. Or I set it at 3,200 for tungsten or incandescent, and that is dead on always. I also have different lights, like for instance, I have like my dado lights that are LEDs that I can change the color temperature. Since I can change the color temperature and I know what it is, I will set it to that. So if I set my dado light at 5,600, I'll set my color temperature there. But let's say you're shooting with daylight, because that's kind of where this comes up a lot. Or you're shooting with unreliable lights, or you're shooting in mixed light. So there's a few different things. I'm going to show you a couple of different options, kind of in order of price, low to high, that I use often, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about why I use each one. And this isn't going to be a tremendously long or in-depth video. It's just going to be an overview. If you guys have more specific questions, then I can do like a more elaborate video, maybe actually using the thing and doing the white balance and stuff in the future. But I just wanted to do an overview today. So let me switch over to that screen. All right, so here we are. You're showing my desktop right now. But there's my mouse. So this is the first option. You probably see me use this a lot. The PhotoVision digital target is one of the simplest ways to get your white balance correct. Now, it's got three areas here, right? You've got your white, your gray, and your black. The reason for that is because you can also use this to set a good histogram, which is good. You can basically use it like a light meter in a situation where you're not exactly sure how you want to meter things. Also, the backside of it is a silver reflector, which I find to be super useful. So I have tons of these. I have them like almost all my bags. You probably see me all the time with them. This is probably the thing I use the most. if I'm trying to get white balance, if I know I'm going to, let's say I'm shooting a portrait, let's start from there, and the white balance doesn't have to be exactly correct, but I want to know what the light is so I can tweak it later, I will use this to set a basic white balance. That's usually what I use it for. It's pretty darn good. And like I said, you can use it to get your exposure. Maybe I'll do a video on that because it's kind of cool how you set the, although they do have a video, I believe, showing you how to do it, but maybe I'll do one. Anyways, that's number one. That's cheap. There is a smaller one, but I wouldn't get the smaller one because if you're going to use it to get your exposure, you're going to want to fill the frame with the thing, and if the little 6-inch one is kind of small. So I really wouldn't do that unless you absolutely, your budget is that much less and you just can only afford that one, then of course it's fine. But this is the one I like. There are other things like this to set white balance that are solely gray, and those are also fine. Like Last Light has a really nice one, but I like the ability to have the white, gray, and black here. So for me, this is good. Also, when you're teaching yourself how to do white balance, this is important because if you do not expose properly and you set your white balance, especially a custom white balance, and then you have to tweak your exposure later in post, it will screw up the color. So the color will shift when you change your exposure. So getting the exposure correct first, that's why I often say when you're watching me do stuff live, when I do this live, I always do it after the lights are set up. You need to have all your lights in place, everything set up before you do this, and if you change anything, you gotta do it again. That's super important if you want it to be accurate. And this is pretty good. If you're doing like basic like web product stuff for like small businesses and stuff where the color is important, but it's not like super vital, this will be totally fine in most cases. The second thing would be, by the way, I'm going to put links to this in the description so you can find them that way. This is all on Adorama. This is the X-Rite chart. If you saw the conversation I had with Paul Giacobello a week and a half ago, whenever it was, he was talking about this. This is when you really need correct color. This is the X-Rite chart. There's lots of different products from X-Rite, so I know people are going to put in the comments, I use this one, or you should use that one. Whichever one. This is the one that I generally use because it's just the generic a card. You can get like the passport and all the funky stuff. This has got all the different colors, and this stuff is very precise. You want to make a photo with this in it. You don't want to just photograph this. That's kind of important. So, like for instance, if you're gonna, let's say this is my frame, which you can see me here, you wouldn't like zoom in and just photograph the card. What you want to do is put it like over here where it's not like in front of anything important. Well, I guess to the side probably. And then you would photograph it in the shot because you want to use this card to set your white balance, but also to tweak color. So you want to make sure you can see the shot when you do it. That's important. Sometimes I see people just hold them up and fill the lens with it. You don't want to do it that way. It should be in the shot. So that's the color checker card. Those are like $80. They are, if you're going to do professional product work or anything where color is actually like very important, this is what you want, a product from X-Rite, this one or one of the other ones. I think this is one of the cheapest ones nowadays. They also make a white, gray, black card thing, but it's like, I don't know if they're still doing it. I wouldn't get the X-Rite for that, even though it's really good, because it's like, I think almost as expensive as this one. And frankly, I don't think it's any better than the digital target for that purpose. And the digital target is, you can beat the crap out of it because it's plasticky, and so, yeah. If you're just going white, gray, black, I'd get digital target. If you're getting the color chips, I would get the X-Rite. Finally, if color is super important to you, and it's really important, and you're going to filter, and you're going to do all kinds of stuff, this is especially important, I would say, for filmmakers, where they're using a lot of different sources that they're trying to match them and stuff, then you might want to use a color meter. Color meters are, get ready for the shock value, color meters are not inexpensive, right? This is a tool that is going to be in your kit forever, basically. This is the color and luminance meter from Sekonic. They might make other ones. I don't use a color meter generally. If I do, I rent one. So whatever the newest, greatest one is the one I would use. Because I only use it if it's super important. What you want to do with a color meter is you can do things like balance all your lights. Like it's back in the day when strobes were good, but they weren't as good as they are now. You might have like 3 or 4 strobes in a pack. And then, especially in pack systems, where, like, let's say you throw a head extension on one strobe and you put it out there further away, that strobe might actually shift in color. It was just by a little bit, right? So what you end up doing is you color meter everything, and then you filter everything. You then gel any lights that need to be gelled to match your shot, right? So that's kind of why we used to use them a lot more often. With digital, and with flashes being way better than they used to be, pro level flash is generally dead on with color, so it's not as important for a lot of people. But if you're doing reproduction stuff, high-level product photography, high-level fashion photography, things where color is really, 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 really important, you're going to use this and the color checker. You're not going to not use the color checker. You're going to use that as well. You're going to use them together. This is going to read the color of your light. This one is going to be how you're going to kind of set your white balance. You're going to look at this and tweak the white balance using especially in post, and do color correction from there. So it's a combination. Like I said, I don't currently own a color meter. I have owned them in the past, but it was one of the things I got rid of when I basically switched over to digital and didn't really need it as much, because they are quite expensive. And by the way, even on the used market, they're not going to be super cheap because the pros buy them, and they last forever. So once you get one of these, if you think it's something that you want, then you're going to have it for a long time. So if it's something that color is really important to you, especially if you do artwork reproduction, definitely look into the color meter. Really, really good to have. If you're doing, again, commercial type work where color is very important, get yourself a color checker. And if you just want to get a place where you can set a custom white balance very easily and consistently, then get yourself one of these PhotoVision targets. Basically, any of those tools will do the job, depending on what you're trying to do. If worst case scenario, you can always, like I always say, you can just set it based on something white in the scene. Like I have a white thing behind me, right? So I could theoretically click on that and get the color. It's not going to be as good because that's not actually neutral. Sometimes people's eyes or their teeth, depending on the person, might be clear enough that you can get a white balance off of that. But really, you want it to be neutral. The term is white balance, and we say white balance a lot. But really, what you should be thinking is neutral, right? And I say that over and over again because you're going to quickly jump on Adorama and you're going to be like, oh, hold on, there's a $2 gray card here. No, you don't want a gray card. You want a white balance tool. Gray cards are used with their 18% gray. They're used for exposure, right? Some gray cards are also white balance tools, but not all of them. So make sure that you're getting one that's made for white balance, and you'll be good to go. Otherwise, my advice would generally be to shoot raw. And I generally, personally, because the way I work and the way I think, I almost always just shoot in either tungsten if I'm shooting tungsten, daylight if I'm shooting daylight. That includes if it's a cloudy day. I just shoot it in daylight, and then I do my adjustments after the fact. Or I shoot, in flash if I'm in the studio. That's basically how I do it. Go ahead and ask more questions, guys, and I'll make more videos like this. And I have the other video that I'm editing. What's tricky about it is I'm showing you how to edit on the iPad by editing on the iPad. So it's like I'm recording myself. So we're going to see how that comes out. In any case, also look for that. I mentioned this before. I did the video for Adorama for the Explore 300. That should come out soon. I'll put a link in all my stuff once that comes out. So be on the lookout for that. And I will see you tomorrow.